starting now.
Okay. That's English, yeah?
Yep, sure.
We weren't sure. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We weren't sure whether to have this in English or in Romanian. And after a brief chat with Andy, we decided it was going to be in English. Apparently that was on the poster as well, poster for the event, but I did not see that. So, but anyway, welcome.
I'm starting to think it was just in my imagination or something.
No, some other people were saying that they saw it, so
okay.
It didn't.
There's proof.
Yeah. Okay, there's proof for that. So it gives me great pleasure to be here and to talk with Andy rather than about his book. So we'll talk together about his book on Vonnegut and humour. Mind you, it's serious business. It's a serious book about a funny author, I suppose, isn't it? Yeah.
Usually academic books about humor are notoriously unfunny. So I'm hoping you weren't actually expecting to laugh all the way through it as you read it. There are some parts, though.
Well, I was laughing here and there.
Yeah, some parts.
Some of the things that I was laughing were written by Vonnegut. And,
well, he is the master.
Okay, so this it's a book, but really behind the book there's a lot of, as you start to read the book, you realize there's a lot of research behind it. That there's years and years of reading and working and a very minutious sort of exploration of the works of Vonnegut. What exactly, Andy, drew you to this, to Vonnegut and to humour, or to humour and to Vonnegut, if we're to follow the order in which they are in the book, which deals with theories of humour first, and then goes on to discuss Vonnegut's.
Well, actually, the way I went was sort of the other way around, because I first discovered Vonnegut, so that was how I kind of started. In college, like most people, I think. Actually, I think it's mentioned somewhere that I went to Cornell, and there.
And he went to Cornell. And he went to.
And he went
to Cornell.
He went to Cornell, and that was the whole thing. There were some people talking about famous writers who were alumni of Cornell, and Vonnegut is presented as someone who is alumni, but actually he went to chemistry and he dropped off after the first year. But anyway, I thought, okay, famous author, let's check him out. And I picked up a copy of Slaughterhouse-Five, because I heard that was his most famous. And actually what first drew my attention wasn't the actual book, it was a comment on the back. It said that it's a funny story that you are not permitted to laugh at. And I found that a very strange notion, that you could have a comedy or humorous book that you're not supposed to laugh at. I mean, I did laugh a lot, but reading through it, I got his point.
Did that stop you from laughing at all?
No. It just, basically, from my point of view, and I guess from most points of view, he was wrong. People, I think, usually do laugh when they read Slaughterhouse-Five. But it's sort of laughing sorrowfully, sort of laughing with tears of sorrow. It also gave me the idea for the title, Funny Comment, Sad Context, because the things he talks about in his works are not funny things of themselves. They're not light things. Think of cats. Well, in Slaughterhouse-Five, it's about war, death, and the question of whether there's any point in anything, especially fighting the inevitable. Shouldn't we just sit back and enjoy what we can and then die?
Right. So there's a first level when you discover a writer such as Vonnegut, and he's funny, right? He's humorous, and also the experience is puzzling because, as you were saying, there are things there that you shouldn't normally in the logic of common sense laugh about. And how does one go? How did you go from this first level, which could be a level of analysis, and it is in the book as well, to the much more applied analysis of actually what it's as if you read the book, and I hope you do get to read this if you haven't already. It's a quest in so many ways. It looks for what exactly is what are the makings, what is the source of humor in some of these works. Yes.
So I definitely, again, starting from that quote, even though, like I said, I laughed a lot at Slaughterhouse-Five, I did still feel like that there was this this interesting style, way of creating humor. In some ways, almost a unique style of it. How he manages to, essentially using humor to take some subjects that actually most people would probably not even want to think about, and present them in a way in which they become perfectly easy to digest. And he does this through humor. So I wanted to know, I guess my question was, how exactly does he do this? And does he do it the same throughout his entire career? Does it change in some way? And so those were the big questions that I wanted to answer when I was trying to understand the humor. How exactly does he manage to permit the reader to contemplate on these dark things in such an easy way?
Because what do you mean by easy? What is the easy that you...
For example, because I kept mentioning Slaughterhouse-Five, so this is a book about the miseries of war, about the horrors of being a prisoner of war, and of being a survivor of the firebombing of Dresden. Which are all sort of horrible things. But then what he does is he puts these things in the context of...
Welcome, and
welcome.
We're surely glad that nothing happened. Wouldn't have been funny at all.
That's a matter of opinion.
Yes, I was gonna get into that later. I mean, yes.
And then what does he do in order to make it easier for the reader to digest these things? He puts the protagonist. He gives the protagonist the role of Billy Pilgrim, which is the goofiest person you can imagine, who probably should have died within the first 5 minutes of the war, yet he's the protagonist that survives. Everyone. There are no villains in the book. There's no bad people. Even the Germans, they're not bad. They're sick, they're weak, they're stupid, but not bad.
Not even Paul Lazaro?
Not even him, because, he's the one who comes closest, but you can kind of even understand him as in, it's his survival instinct that dominates.
There's a moment from Slaughterhouse-Five that comes back to me when I think about Lazaro, and it's when they're on a train and Darby is giving this speech about how he has to make sure that everybody gets home safe, and Lazaro tells him, and you must imagine this with the New York Italian accent, go take a flying fuck at a rolling donut. So it's really, and if that's a joke, then you perhaps later will explain how that joke works for people, because it's funny, while it's not, why the context of it is not funny at all.
Yeah. And it had, in many ways, it was necessary, because there's an interesting line in the book at one point. It says that the book has no characters, because everyone is too sick and weak to do anything in particular. And then you have this character Darby, who actually, as it's hinted, he risks becoming a character, and he risks becoming the hero. And do you remember how? Did you get how Vonnegut solves the problem of him being a hero?
Remind us.
So he dies after 150,000 people died in the firebombing of Dresden, and the survivors are put to dig up the bodies and so on. He finds a silver pot, if I remember.
Yeah.
Teapot, and he just picks it up and shows it to someone, and the Germans accuse him of stealing and summarily execute him. Of everything that happened, first of all, this is how he dies. Second of all, you find out about this on page 5. And periodically, you are reminded. Almost every time he mentions Edgar Darby, the book also mentions the stupid way in which he dies. And again, this sort of destroys his image as a hero, and also I think makes it a little lighter. The idea of sort of, I think if he had only mentioned how he dies at the end, it could have been interpreted as tragic.
Right.
But the fact that he mentions it over and over again throughout the novel effectively dismisses the tragedy of it.
Right. So I was thinking about getting a little bit into the specifics of your
Right.
analysis, but before that, I just you were talking about the questions that motivated it.
Right.
When you got to the end of it, were you satisfied? Are you happy with the way that it turned out? Did you find the answers that you were looking for? Did you find other answers that you weren't looking for?
Definitely. I mean, I asked a very general question, and I didn't actually know exactly what I was going to find really at the start. Probably with a few more years, I could find even more. As you noticed, I used that linguistic theory of humor to identify the bits, the fragments, and no matter how many times I read and reread the novels, every time I reached the end, I looked back and I thought, am I sure I found every one of them? And am I sure that I analyzed all of them correctly? No, I'm not. Because in some ways there is a level of interpretation in identifying them, and so I have to wonder whether someone who reads one of the books, will maybe find something I missed, which is great because it only adds to the image.
Did you feel at some point while you were writing that practically sometimes in order to follow your path, what you had to do was to explain jokes?
Yes. There's a reason why they say that texts that analyze humor are not funny. It's because in some ways that's what you do. Even the idea of breaking down a humorous text into formal structures, basically, for anyone reading it, is sort of, I think, actually obliterates the humorous impact. It stopped being funny.
Well, I was laughing at the fragments and the jokes.
Yes.
I wasn't laughing when I was reading the analysis. But
yeah.
that's to be explained.
That's what I want to say. Interestingly enough, if I were to pick up now one of those books, I'd still find them funny.
So it didn't exhaust the humor, the fact that you had to go through them.
The only consequence of my research now is that whenever I hear a joke or tell or read something, I instinctively start looking for the structure of it.
So it's a professional.
It's a professional defect. So once I hear a joke, I laugh, and then somewhere at some point
you
I
start to explain
analyzing.
it back to the guy and say.
Well, to myself, I would never do that to anyone. I wouldn't want to bother them with that.
Haha, you know why that's funny?
Exactly.
All right. Right. So in order to do this, you delved into a number of theories of humor,
Right.
Which are historical, philosophical, literary, but you settled mostly on semantics and semantic theory of humor. It's something that's called SSTH, which kind of sounds like an STD.
Yes, it does.
And something called GTVH. It sounds like a vaccine or a cure for that. So,
Right.
they're semantic theory of.
Well, one's a semantic theory. The other one is supposed to be a general theory of linguistic theory. Yes. Yeah. So the first one is a semantic theory of humor, which just deals with the meaning and not so much with how the jokes are interpreted. And the problem, its problem is it literally is just limited to jokes. Someone once tried to, I think I mentioned that in the book somewhere, someone tried to use that for an actual literary text, and it was a disaster because he tried to interpret every single part of the story just from a semantic point of view. And
what happens then if you do this? What's your experience
Well,
working in this way?
If you try that, then you end up trying to turn a text that's one thing I found reading texts like Vonnegut's works and others from the point of view of studying the humor is that a so-called humorous text is actually just a regular text that has a lot of humorous bits in it. When you try to do it just semantically, you end up trying to force a perspective where you'd say that every single part of the text is humorous, which is simply not true. And so the image you get in the end is one that becomes more and more you trying to fit your own perspective into
What's actually there?
Into what's actually there. Yes.
Yeah.
And that's where the general theory has the advantage, because there the semantic part is just one part. Elements, things like target or the logical mechanism, how the humor is formed, come into play, or the situation. Is it a poem or an image or other thing? You can take the general theory of verbal humor and to an extent use it also for things like newspaper cartoons. To give you an example, there's the image of a room with a so imagine we're in this room, but there's a window here, and there's a box with the image of a pogo, and there are images, there are marks on the floor of little round marks that lead to the window and out the broken window, right? The logical mechanism, by the way, there is missing link, because what you understand is that the kid hopped around and then jumped into outside the window, but that part's not in the image. You mentally reconstruct that part, so that part's missing. Right. Semantic theory just doesn't have anything like that. Well, the general theory does.
There's with you were mentioning it, and you mention it in your book, and it's certainly true of other writers, that there's a facility, there's an ease with Vonnegut's humor, right? It makes it all seem so natural, and yet if you delve beneath that, then the underpinnings are quite complex, and not only are they complex, if I gather this rightly from reading the book, but they're different from one novel to another. Basically, there are differences between Cat's Cradle and Slaughterhouse 5 or Dead-Eye Dick or the works that
right.
Yeah.
There's I mean, there are definitely differences of first of all of style, of approach. In many ways, Slaughterhouse 5 is a more from the point of view of the novel is more complicated, because you have the whole idea that who's the author, is the author part of the novel, because the first chapter is apparently Vonnegut talking about writing the book, So you have the writer talking about that's in the book, writing about writing the book, where Cat's Cradle does or Did I Dig don't have these. Especially with the humor, you can definitely see interesting differences. Cat's Cradle has a lot more variety of humor. It's more in some ways it's more entertaining because he actually tried to create the novel in such a way that every single short chapter is a joke, in some ways, very much to entertain. Slaughterhouse 5 is more focused on the main themes, and then Did I Dig is even more so, which is a reflection of Vonnegut had this philosophy of the role of the author, of the writer, that the writer had to, it was the writer's duty to try and enlighten his reader. If you just wrote to entertain, or if you just wrote to create elaborate styles that you'd have to be a genius to understand, then you weren't really doing your job as a writer from his point of view. That's why he wasn't very well received by many critics because he used very simple language and simple images in order to try and get his ideas out to his reader as clearly as possible.
And it should be mentioned, this is also in the book, so part of the book is also somewhat of a monograph. So you do follow Vonnegut himself in parts of the book. You're not just delving directly into the analysis, which eases the reader inside. So it's another good move, I think. Were there parts? This is a question that came from reading your book, but also reminiscing because I didn't read Vonnegut for a while. I haven't read Vonnegut for a while. The parts in some of the novels that your theory, the theory that you used, or the theories that were unable to explain. Right? One thing that came to my mind, just like it popped into my head, was the way that the aliens, the Tralfamadorians, look in which they look like a hand with an eye at the center of the palm, right? And that in some way is funny, and I was wondering whether the theory that you use can explain that as well, or that is some sort of register of humor that's not explainable in that way.
So, if I remember correctly, the way they're described, so they have a whole body with feet, but their eyes are on their hands, right? And that's how they look. And it is a peculiar and strange image. See, this is a part I missed when I picked the fragments. I told you every time I read, I had a feeling like I missed something. You could break it down in the sense of.
Well, I'm not. I mean, the question. This was my example, but whether there's some part of that's funny,
right?
But that the theory perhaps is unable to explain.
Well, let's just put it this way. I haven't found a part. But it is true that one of the limitations of this theory is, or maybe of all theories, that they are true as long as no one can find a part. So there might be. It's not. In some way, that's why it's a theory and not a theorem. There's no guarantee that it's foolproof, and that there aren't parts of humor. For example, one thing which I kind of only sort of mentioned there, but which got me thinking of maybe the limitations of the humor, was when I felt I needed to introduce that idea of a jab-line fragment in Slaughterhouse 5, which doesn't exist in the actual theory. But the actual theory, when you try to analyze Slaughterhouse 5, the humor of Slaughterhouse 5, just using the theory, it comes off as too simple. In some ways, it should reflect the complexity of the novel, and that worked for the others. But just using the theory on Slaughterhouse 5, it comes off far more simplistic than the novel. And then I I worked with it. I introduced this idea of a jab-line fragment that has to do with connecting to the grief and indifference towards death, and then it got me wondering. This is one thing I want to try and look at other novels to see. Am I going to have to adapt the theory every time to every? Like if I look at the works of some other comedic author, Heller or something, am I going to find there as well places where the theory doesn't fit? So I would say that yes, it's not a perfect theory. Yeah. But then again, Attardo even says that it's a work in progress.
And are you? And this is perhaps my last question, because I want to open this for other people who might have their own questions. Are you working towards that? I know that in some way you are. So you're opening this field of research towards other writers than Vonnegut.
Yeah. So right now I'm in the process of creating sort of a database for myself of writers and books. Writers, because you can't really just focus on one book or another. I want to try and analyze, sort of do something similar with other writers. Woody Allen's one of them. And to try and see the humor. I am focusing for now only on American and only on 20th century, because there's already a lot of literature there.
Yeah. And well, one thought is that perhaps in some version of the future you could do this with a software. I mean, if you were able to isolate bits, right? And if you had a software that could isolate bits that follow a certain pattern, and you could use the software perhaps somewhere in the future.
Maybe.
If somebody
that would be interesting. Develop a software.
See Alexandra here, who kind of works in
exactly
in a related area,
so maybe the problem is with how easy would it be, because there's the idea of spotting the script opposition, and sometimes the script opposition is obvious and sometimes it's not.
There are many variables in that.
Sometimes you, like for example with in Slaughterhouse 5 with the catchphrase "so it goes," which in time forms a script opposition between grief and indifference towards death, but it does so by the fact that it's repeated so many times in whether you're talking in different contexts, whether you're talking about people getting shot or champagne left unopened and the bubbles leaving. There's a line there: the champagne was dead, so it goes. In the exact same as the saying Edgar Derby was shot, so it goes. So same thing from that point of view. And could a program adequately recognize these things? That would be a problem.
Well, that's a question for the future.
Right.
For me, I suppose I want to thank you for the book, because it's a book that makes you think about things that you don't normally think about. And it takes you beyond the, I think, level of mere enjoyment, where you're I don't know, just reading the book by Vonnegut, or and now you start to think towards other things like stand-up comedy or a sitcom or something, and whether the same sort of underpinnings. You do mention this in the book, but I'm feigning like I didn't read that part.
Right.
Well, you do say that it works for other products as well. So yeah. Because
you mentioned stand-up comedy. I mean, he learned how to create humor.
Yeah.
Vonnegut, how to create humor by watching stand-up comedy later on television and in movies. Big fan of Laura and Hardy and so on, and others. And he used to create sketches with his sister back when she was still alive of humor, in order to try and learn how to create jokes, which just kind of, in a way, got sad towards the end of his life, because he used to say that creating jokes was so easy for him that he just did it and didn't even think of whether it was funny. He knew it was funny, though he didn't laugh anymore.
Perfected the method.
Right, yeah. He talks towards the end of his life about creating jokes. Like it's basically baking a loaf of bread.
Which isn't that easy. I mean,
which is not easy.
I don't know about you, but I wouldn't.
Or let me put it this way: it's like baking a bread for a baker. I mean, that's so.
Oh, yeah.
It's about as difficult as he found it to create
what would
jokes.
that be for us?
Well, I've tried making bread and it was a disaster so far. So.
Okay, right. So again, thank you. I think we can give him a hand for the book, but a round of applause. But
I'm still waiting for a hand.
It's like a Tralfamadorian hand with an eye. So don't they have, like instead of a head, they have this hand that has an eye? Like
no, they have a head. They just don't have eyes on the head. They just have eyes on
the hands.
On the hands.
All right. I'll have to reread that, because I kind of remembered that they had a hand instead of a head,
right.
Which would have been freaky. Yes, but
how do they write? They don't.
They don't write ever. They have literature.
They have literature. That was one of the ways in which Slaughterhouse-Five was a very different novel, because it said that at one point in time the Transformadorians did describe one of their novels, and says that there is no past, present, or future. Everything happens at the same time, and it's all in order to create a single image. And the interesting part is that you could argue that Slaughterhouse-Five was created in that way.
Like a Tralfamadorian.
Yes, like a Tralfamadorian novel.
Yeah.
Through the fact that everything is repeated over and over, so that when you actually get to, like for example, when you finally get to the point where Edgar Derby died, you've been told about it so many times that you felt like you're reading this for the first and 20th time at once.
But he does die. So it goes.
So it goes.
Yes. Right. So I'm sure some of you have questions, or as readers of Vonnegut, as people who enjoy a good joke, humor. Maybe we can have Andy explain our joke, shoot jokes at him.
No. I'm really trying not to get into that habit too much. So far, it's just logical mechanisms usually. Someone says a joke, and I think of the logical mechanisms in the joke.
Oh yeah, I've seen that a million times.
Yeah.
Find something funnier, man. Okay,
before
so
or after you laugh. I'm curious. Before or after you laugh. About the mechanism.
If I'm somewhere towards the end of laughing.
So you haven't stopped laughing,
No.
but already you're kind of yeah. Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's laughing is sort of the automatic response, and then immediately at some point I start thinking about it, and the first thing that pops into my head is the structure. But
What a terrible formalist you are.
which is weird.
Structure, we just start laughing.
That's an interesting idea.
Really?
Probably not, because the really this even this linguistic theory. One thing I found while trying to apply it to literature is that it's great for identifying humor and for showing its structure. It gives you nothing in terms of meaning and context and so on. It can identify it, but it can't explain to you what it is. So if you just showed me a structure, I'd just see a structure, not a joke. You'd have to, but then I'd try to think of a joke that fits that structure. And there I laugh.
Favorite Vonnegut joke or story?
So first, actually, I was thinking at some point while we were talking, we keep talking about Slaughterhouse-Five. My favorite novel is actually Cat's Cradle, because it, in some ways, because I feel like it better imbibes that the whole difficult issues, light humor, the combination works even better in Cat's Cradle. And like I said, in Slaughterhouse-Five, he mainly makes fun of the main things. There, he makes fun of everything in Cat's Cradle. A favorite joke. Well, actually, my favorite joke from Vonnegut isn't from his books. It's from his second autobiography, where he says that he intends to sue the tobacco company because he's been smoking Pall Malls or Pall Malls for 30 years, and they kept promising that he'll die and he's still here, and so he wants to sue them. That I think is my favorite joke of his. Which, I mean, it reflects the also his type. It's very, very Vonnegut, to put it that way. Sort of dark humor.
Can I tell you my favorite one?
Yes, sure.
So it's a story about Vonnegut. Have you seen the movie Back to School?
Back to School.
It's a movie from the 80s. And
Right.
It's about Rodney Dangerfield. And as an old man, he has to go back to school. And his English teacher gives him an assignment to write a paper about Vonnegut. And him being a rich guy, a rich old man, he does what? He hires Vonnegut himself to write a paper. And the next week, he goes back to school, and the teacher gives him an F because she didn't agree with anything about on the paper. The paper being written by Vonnegut, of course.
Well, first of all, from everything I've read about Vonnegut, I think he'd be the last person you'd want to write about him, because he'd just write whatever came to mind, and it might definitely not be what the teacher wanted. I'm also thinking, when you said that, I immediately thought of the idea, the sort of the funny anecdote about Charlie Chaplin, who went to a Charlie Chaplin lookalike contest and came in third. So yeah, Vonnegut writing about Vonnegut. I'm not surprised he got an F. It would have made no sense from a humorous point of view. It would have made no sense for him to get an A, because that would have been the obvious thing for him to get an A.
Oh, sorry, you're explaining.
And here I am explaining. Yes, sorry. I just started explaining why that's funny. Right.
Yeah.
Anything else? Questions, dilemmas, concerns? Like I tell my students, your personal dilemmas are for your psychologist, but anything else?
Oh. Well, if there are any other questions, then again, thank you.
Thank you.
Annie, and thank you for coming. And of course, we'll have the author signing books if you are looking to get one and reading. Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming.
Or informally chat or tell jokes or whatever. Other ending to the evening that you want.
I'm still curious of one thing. Why is it that whenever people are in a group, someone starts telling a joke, and then the next person starts telling a joke, and the next, and the next, and the next?
Bonding.
Bonding. Yes.